Hi, what we're going to talk about at this point in time is the family system and how the family is impacted from alcohol or substance abuse. And it's important to be able to understand this because in a variety of ways we are not aware a lot of times how we may be affecting other people we care about. And this is in line with people who are recognizing being alcoholic or an addict in this model originally, but it does have a contributing factor to people also in where there's mental illness in the family, divorce, and other factors that cause difficulty in the family system. So what we're going to talk about first of all are two different family systems. One, which is primarily a goal-setting factor of looking at family systems, is the open family system. In an open family system, we see where it's very comfortable for people in this family to be able to go out and extend and attempting to try different things, experiences outside of the family. For instance, younger youth, for instance, going out and testing their limits, but yet being under the supervision from family members so that they don't put themselves at risk. And as a result of that, that helps the person to build self-esteem. And a big factor that contributes to family systems is how their family system contributes to people in them being able to build their self-esteem, and opposed to family systems that basically pull or drain that away. Now, when we look at a family system, we can consider it being like a mobile. When you see a mobile, if all the pieces evenly fit in balance, like a family, everybody fulfills a responsibility, not because that's what they're supposed to do, it's just what they do as being part of that family. And if you take a piece off of that mobile, the entire mobile will adjust to compensate for the loss. And when we're addressing around the issues related to that family system, family members will assume different responsibilities within the family to adjust to that family member not being available. But of course, once that person gets better and feels better and has been back into the family system, assuming the responsibilities, everybody will adjust back to their normal activities. Now, unless we're dealing with something that is a continuation issue where the person isn't available for those responsibilities, then those people will continue with those, continue with their sort of responsibilities beyond their own. Now, when you look at the way families originally have been for thousands of years, they've been a part of a support system and a network, not only for emotions, but for physical protection. 100 years ago, if it wasn't for family members, if somebody was ill, people would refrain from activities outside of the family to protect and preserve the family so that they can be safe. And this closing off factor happens in families where people who are taking actions, initiating actions outside of the family, if somebody is ill, they will come back in. And where there's substance abuse, this factor will continue to occur where the family encloses and closes off and develops in this closed system. Closed systems in families don't allow people to pursue their own activities that would offer them unique experiences of their own. So along those lines, I want to talk about other things that contribute to the family systems and impact those people in the family from substance abuse. One of them is called transference. And I'll use an example of an imaginary friend of mine named Jerry here. And Jerry is a fun-loving guy, full of jokes, fun guy to be around. And I take Jerry out to dinner with a priest, a pastor, and a minister. And at that time, Jerry tells the dirtiest joke he ever heard. Well, because I was through association with Jerry, and being with me, I would feel responsible for his behavior. I'd be feeling ashamed of his behavior because his behavior was shameless, correct? And what would occur is that I would be very uncomfortable about what occurred there. And that's called transference. When when we're talking about family systems, people have much more sensitivity to this transference because that's been part of their existence of the most personal part of their lives, being family members. And along this line with Jerry is that on the way home, I would be able to let go of this shame and embarrassment that I held on to if I were to confront Jerry and say, Jerry, your behavior had affected my relationship with you and has caused irreparable damage. I don't know if we're going to be able to work through this, but I need to let you know that you really did have an effect on me tonight and those people I was with. Now, by doing that, I would have transferred back the responsibility to Jerry for his behavior, and that's called confrontation. Now, I want to point something out, and we're going to start by looking at the design of how transference occurs just in the beginning development of relationships. Okay? So, say in a situation, there is somebody that I'm getting involved with, or this particular person that is in this relationship has a pattern of substance abuse. And with that pattern of substance abuse, we can recognize people with developing into chemical dependency a lot of times where they associate that they feel more alive, more energized with the involvement with their use of that substance and that peer group that they associate with than anywhere else in their life. So that trigger itself, or that in itself triggers patterns of loss of control where they put themselves or other people at risk. So let's use this as an example here. And this person here is getting in a relationship with this individual, and they don't know that they're a substance abuser on a regular basis, and they are involved in this relationship, and they have a dinner party set up for their partner to be able to meet their parents, and this person takes off and he's involved with his friends, and he doesn't come back, or he comes back intoxicated or high, and as a result of that, you feel angry and frustrated and stressed, and also there's a bit of transference that occurs in that relationship immediately to the individual that's involved with the substance abuser because that person isn't acting responsibly. So in the beginning stages, if this person turns around and confronts them and holds them accountable for their behavior, in most cases, this particular individual who's a substance abuser on a regular basis is going to cut loose that relationship. But more often, you find a selection process occurring in people being attracted to other people who are substance abusers who have patterns themselves of having abandonment issues themselves and having difficulty in confronting others. Okay? So when a person has difficulty in confronting others, they may make an overt effort to confront the person, tell them they're angry, show them they're angry, but when it comes down to the real factors of them demonstrating a need to change, they give them an opportunity to be able to not have to. Okay? So along the lines, this person will then make the confrontation in such a way that this individual recognizes they have a doorway to continue with that behavior, and they feel comfortable in that relationship. And actually, this person, if they've had abandonment issues or that they have sought out that partner because of areas that they've had within their pattern of relationships in the past, this will continue to build. Okay, an enabling relationship. Now, if somebody is in this role having difficulty in confronting their partner, how do they get the message out? One way is through manipulation, okay? And they design that so that the person says, "Oh, gee, we'll go out I'll buy this camping gear and we'll go out camping together, get away from your friends." But instead he invites his friends with him, they go out and party, and they're left frustrated, okay? That might be one example of this relationship building this way. Another factor involved in that would be what we call passive-aggressive behavior. The person is uncomfortable with confrontation, those abandonment issues we talked about, so they confront the person in an aggressive way, but then they go back into a victim stance behind this, where they don't stand up for themselves. So what does that put this person in a position of doing? To waylaying them, putting further responsibility back on the partner. Okay, this person gets abused, gets the verbal onslaught, and then their partner goes back into a victim stance. That gives them an opportunity to advance and dump all sorts of emotions on their partner. So along the line, this relationship starts building, okay? And what occurs as a result of this is that partner starts developing what I call, they start to be carrying the load of emotions for the partner as a result of the transference, okay? And of course, they're continuing to push and try to control the partner to change, which is causing this interaction to becoming destructive and pretty explosive at times, okay? What occurs along this line of this interaction is there's different forms of violence that can develop. One of it is through verbal abuse. The person may use sarcasm. Sarcasm is a word that's Latin for cutting of flesh. It's not a very good comment when you think about it, if you think in those terms. But there are the factors involved in this that continue to escalate the conflict between both of them and keeping the focus off of the substance abuse being the primary issue. Okay? So this interaction continues to accelerate, and pretty soon the person over here, which you may identify being the codependent over here, is involved with someone who they feel is a back walking away from them, because the person who's a substance abuser is feeling they're more alive with their activities in association with their peers who use and abuse than with their partner, okay? So the partner then feels like they are in a relationship with somebody's back walking away. And what happens then is their partner finally just says, "Forget it, I'm going to let it go, I'm going to walk away." And when that happens, the person who's a substance abuser, because there's this transference occurring, they stop, because this person has just cut and severed that umbilical cord of transference. So the person feels that and experiences a sense of remorse and regret for what they're doing, because it's actually their feelings they're feeling for the first time in a long time, rather than that person experiencing them. And they come back and they try to coerce their partner to come back into the relationship with them. It's kind of a dance that people do. And they'll use that same magnetic personality that got that relationship in the first place. Have you ever watched the movie Blues Brothers? Now, it's an old-time movie, and John Belushi is being chased around from his girlfriend who he abused, and she's got a bazooka, right? Well, she finally corners him, and he then takes those sunglasses off that movie's famous for, and bats those pearly blue eyes at her, puts her in his arms and say, "Honey, do you love me?" And she says, "Yes." And he drops her in the mud and keeps going on, okay? This is what happens in substance abuse. The partner gets them to recognize they're going to change, there's going to be lots of opportunity for this relationship to work, And then once that they've won over their partner, they continue doing what was natural for them. So at this point in time, the codependent has to get, they have to recognize either I have to sever this relationship, or I am going to have to find another method of dealing with this. And this is what happens at this point in time is a person develops into what I call a secondary addiction. The codependent develops into an addiction of their own. They get their own because of coping with, excuse me, coping with these emotions is very intense. And they need something to self-medicate too. So they finally just say, forget it, I'll just join them. I'll just use with them and I'll be with them. Or they say, forget it, I have so many resentments towards you in this relationship that I'll continue in it, but I'll be involved with my own substance abuse, being prescription or something else other than alcohol or what they're using, whatever substance they're using, not going to use it. Or they'll use food, they'll use affairs, having sexual affairs as a way of self-medicating is another way, okay? But they develop some sort of self-medicating way of dealing with this. Now, as this continues on, what I want to point out is that if this person disappeared, what would happen? They'd go out and find somebody else, wouldn't they? Or if they didn't find somebody else, they would develop they would use their kids, they would use other people to replace that with, okay? But usually, you'll have a consistent pattern of a relationship of some sort that will fill this for both sides, because it's two sides of the same coin in dealing with addictions or substance abuse, okay? Now, as we see this model progressing, you see sarcasm, physical abuse, domestic abuse. At one point in time, back in the early 80s, or actually mid-80s, I was a therapist in Tucson, and I was dealing with women who had been sent to emergency rooms more than once as a result of domestic violence. And they were involved in a group therapy process of treating this issue. And I was kind of naive at the time. I remember it being October of 1984 because Farrah Fawcett just made this one movie called The Burning Bed, and all these women singing. You did not want to be a guy in that group that night. There was a lot of energy going around. But I brought up something. I said, what's worse, the physical abuse or the verbal abuse? Now, every one of them, I had seen in an emergency room setting, some of them that sometimes looked it was so crazy that the person was physically abused to the point where you could not recognize them. They looked like an elephant man sometimes from being a broken jaw or whatever it might have been. These people in this group had been severely abused. And every one of them said that verbal abuse was the more difficult issue. And I said, why is that? They said, if you break an arm, it stops for a while. But when you're being told that you're not worth anything and you're worth less, you become a slave. And it's the first time I thought of slavery as being not worth anything in that sense of that person's existence, that they don't have a right for the thoughts within their own head. And that is a form of violence that occurs in these kind of relationships. Both parties, if they were able to recognize they're doing this to each other, would stop immediately. Stop doing this immediately to each other. It's not a conscious choice at this point in time. It's been a pattern of living that has led them to this place that they don't feel any way out, that there's any way out. Well, now, when we see this, if the person stops using alcohol and drugs, what happens? Does it work out? Not necessarily. I was working with, I was working down in Tucson at one point in time, and two therapists that were very well known in Tucson 20 years ago, and they had asked me if I would work with them on their marriage problem and their communication problems. And I said, sure. You know, I didn't understand why, because they were more advanced in their skills than I was. But they said because I was in recovery and they were in recovery, they thought it would make more sense. I said, fine. Well, I've seen both of them talking to each other in the sessions, saying that they were reaching into each other's inner child and strangling the shit out of one another. I'm sorry, you know. They turned therapeutic techniques into torture techniques along the line. Okay? They had healthy relationships with other people, but they weren't able to resolve this issue here. They're clean and sober, but this had become such a detailed part of their life that they weren't able to resolve it. They weren't able to address it, and they ended up breaking up, which is probably, I think, was a good thing. But the solution here isn't just stopping using. It's working on this communication area that needs to be addressed also. Now, along the line, when we're dealing with these kind of things, I want to point some things out. Every once in a while, this argument flares up, and they make up, and have you noticed that sometimes when you make up from a bad fight, some particular things may happen, and all of a sudden, whoopee happens, they have a physical interaction, they have sex, and pops out Junior, right? And all of a sudden, this interaction has developed into a family. And the first emphasis becomes, well, now we're a family, this will fix our problem. Both of them are saying that. And the emphasis puts expectations onto this kid without even knowing it. This kid is transformed into having to work through the problems that these parents have, okay, for them. So who's the kid and who's the adult here, okay? So the first child we talk about being what we call the hero. Now the hero, the first role of this responsibility is they're not consciously doing this, but through physical activity, their physical capability in school, their intellectual capability, they will assume responsibility, they will become overachievers, okay? And along these lines, this achievement will be met to deal with the feeling of powerlessness that both of these parents are experiencing here in their life. And my family, growing up in alcoholism, my brother Head was a hero. In Minnesota, for instance, he held almost 6 track and field records, 3 of them for over 20 years, track and field in sports. Guess who broke his? His first child, his second child, his third. So it becomes necessary for this child to be doing activities to fulfill the needs of the family. Now the next one comes out being scapegoat. Along these lines, you see the positive attention has been taken, so all that's left is a negative attention. Okay? Now, the negative attention is then filled by their activities in such a way that the scapegoat, when they make somebody a victim, they feel empowered. Okay, vandalism is a very common factor in the scapegoat's development during childhood. Okay, they become like little miniature hoods. Okay, in my family, my brother had his state records and I had mine, 18 months at the State Penal Institution in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Okay, so along the line, what comes next? If there's a third child along the line, the negative attention's taken, the positive attention has been taken, so we have what we call the lost child. Now the lost child has the responsibility to fulfill in the family along the lines that there's a sense of emptiness in the family. So the negative attention is taken, the positive attention is taken, so they escape into a world through fantasy. They'll use video games, they'll use movies, TVs, they don't just get into a fantasy about it or daydream about it, that becomes their world. Okay? And that's where they exist. because the real world doesn't have a place for them. And that's because of this emptiness that's being felt throughout the family. Now, the next child, if there's another one, along these lines, hero, scapegoat, lost child, and is the next role along these lines is what we call the mascot. Now the mascot, we always think of mascot being cute and cuddly and charming, which can be part of that. But it's also a place where this is either the youngest child in the family or a child with physical disabilities in some way that the other family members feel a need to protect them. And this need to protect them has to do with the feeling of fear in the family. And they cope with this by existing in this shell of overprotection. Okay? Overprotection can be a form of suffocation of an individual's emotional abilities in development. Okay? So this child ends up dealing with things by becoming fearless, by becoming the cut-up kid in the class, by being willing to take on any risk there is, by having the chip on their shoulder. All these factors contribute to being the mascot. Now, do these things create addictions? I don't think so. I mean, scientists will tell you they believe it does. But I think that when we look at reality, as far as when we were talking about the addictive personality, we were talking about it before, and once it's developed, that's more of a genetic predisposition. Once a person develops in this personality, they're going to have it the rest of their lives. So, by recognizing that this is just something they have to work through, that's more of a genetic factor, the person gets stuck in these patterns which will trigger